I made a short film using mixed media animations, and today I'm showing you my animation workflow so you can do it too. Hi, my name is Marlene. I'm actually a photographer and content creator, but during the past months I was able to dive more into the world of mixed media animation. I actually did one short mixed media animation like 2 years ago, and from there I was really eager to create more, but I just did not have the time until now. And in this video I'm going to tell you more about my animation workflow and then later on dive into the process behind specific animations. But before we jump into the animation process, I quickly wanted to say that all of these animations are part of my new short film Bloom, which is actually a project that I did for my bachelor. And it is actually an interactive film, which means that you are able to choose your own path of the story. So if you want to see more of the animations, check out the film. The very first thing I did was to create a storyboard. This is not a necessary step you have to take, but in my case I also filmed and wrote the entire film myself, so for me it was an essential step to do. Here I could also plan the animations or brainstorm ideas, experiment a little bit, and then just see what fits the vibe of my film in general. And then I just started to draw the elements that I wanted to include. And this doesn't have to be perfect because in the end it just needs to paint a mental picture for you to see how you want the final product to turn out. I also decided to print out some elements and glue them into the little boxes, and then later on I also added notes about like composition, what I wanted to include in the visuals, sometimes a few acting instructions, and also notes about the mixed media animations. You can see me color marking each box with a different color, and this actually has a purpose. Basically, I just highlighted what kind of footage each box is going to be. Pink was for mixed media, blue was for video footage, and then yellow was basically a mix of both. Making a storyboard is not necessary for mixed media animation, but especially when you work on a bigger project like I did, it can help you a lot with keeping order. But after all, mixed media is a very intuitive and experimental medium, so it can also just be great to just go into a project without any plan and just see what you come up with on the way. And when you start with a free approach where you have no preparations, that can also lead to something really amazing. If you are wondering what kind of supplies you need to get started with mixed media animations, you can also see it very well in the upcoming chapters what I'm using. But mainly I just made use of what I had like laying around, like printing paper or just like old pencils and so on. The only things I bought for this were some acrylic markers and some colored carton paper because I wanted to experiment with that a little bit, and of course also ink for my printer. And then some essential tools include things like scissors, definitely a cutter knife, and also a cutting mat so you do not cut into your table. If you're wondering what kind of printer I have, you can literally use any printer. I have the Canon Pixma TS5350 and I use it for printing and scanning. It is not as good as a real flatbed scanner, so if you do have that, that would be absolutely amazing. But for what I'm doing right now, it is totally enough quality-wise. If you want to make mixed media animations, you either need a scanner like I have or like a flatbed scanner, or you can also photograph each single frame later on with your camera, which is a lot of manual work. And personally, I do recommend that you use a scanner. And if you already have a printer and it's not like a really old printer, most modern ones do have scanners integrated at this point. Mixed media is really perfect for experimenting and making use of what you already have. So I can recommend you guys to just see what you have around and upcycle those materials to just get more creative with what you have. Before I'm gonna go into detail of some of the animations that you can see in the film, I really want to show you the mixed media workflow that I've been using for this project, because it is really important that you have a good workflow that makes you really productive and that makes you fast, and it also feels really intuitive, because mixed media can take a long time and you need that organization inside of your workflow to be successful with it. I actually had a supervisor for this project who helped me with this workflow, so shout out to him and thank you, because this has improved my whole work process by a lot, because I'm also still learning mixed media, and I'm learning what is the best way for me and what is the most efficient way to create these animations and work with this kind of editing, because it is quite different when you have to edit and then you have to like physically work with it and then you have to work with it digitally again. And this is a process that you have to get used to when you start doing this kind of stuff. But having this workflow really helped and improved the speed that I've been working on this, and it really helps to understand how it works. So I start by selecting the clip that I want to print out or that I want to put my mixed media animations on. And in this case, it is this really simple top-down clip of the hand reaching into the frame. And I just select that, or already selected that with X, and then the whole clip is selected because I only want this clip. Once you have selected the clip, you can go to export and you can name your file whatever you want. And then we choose the location. Also here, this depends on your organization system, how you like to do it. I have separate folders for each animation that I'm doing. So this is my timeline called approach, and this is the 4th animation, so it is approach 4. And then in each of these folders, I always have 2 subfolders, which are called PNGs and sheets, and the PNGs are where I'm going to export this export into. And then the sheets later on are going to be the scans of the individual frames, but we're coming to that in a second. So we select PNGs, we save this, and I have a preset. And what this preset does is that it exports the frames that I wanted to export as PNG files. But Premiere is a little bit special. So we need to kind of have a workaround, because how mixed media works is that you don't take every frame of the video and animate it. You only take a certain amount of the video and animate it. In my case, I recorded all of the footage that I have with 25 FPS. So it's 25 frames in 1 second that create a video. But I only want to animate every 8th frame of these 25 frames that each second in a video has. Because if I would want to animate 25 frames per second, this would be quite hardcore, and this is really complicated. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And also one of the most distinct elements that mixed media has is that it has this choppy look, and this is what you receive by animating only a portion of these 25 frames per second. In my case, I want to animate every 8th frame, which means I only want to export every 8th frame. This would be the ideal solution, but Premiere doesn't do that. It's not able to do that. So I have like a little workaround that makes it a bit easier. And this is basically saved in this preset, and you can also do it yourself. It's pretty simple. So as format, you choose PNG, and then in video basic settings, you keep your basic frame size, whatever you have, and then export a sequence. It's checked, and then at frame rate, I have 5. You could say, okay, Marlene, why do you not choose 8? Because I want to choose every 8th frame, right? But what Premiere does here is that it just makes the video look like it's 8 frames per second, but it still exports at 25 frames per second. So what it does is that it just plays out 1 frame for like a longer time, basically, but the video itself still remains the same length. But what I want to do is just, I want 1 single frame should be exported every 8th frame, and Premiere can't really do that. So we need to do a little bit of math here, and at first I personally didn't really get it. Like, it was really hard for me to understand because I'm not good with math and numbers, and it's actually like, maybe it sounds quite complicated to you guys as well at first, but trust me, it gets better when you work with this a couple of times. And also remember that when you want to animate in a different frame rate, or, well, if you don't want to do like every 8th frame, but instead you want to do every 5th frame or every 10th frame, it changes for you what you have to put in here as the frame rate. But yeah, let me explain how this works. So I shot at 25 frames per second, which means that at the start, I have every frame in one video. Like the raw video has 25 frames. I have every single frame. And then what I will do is I will export as 5 FPS, which means that Adobe itself only keeps every 5th frame in the video as a start. And then I take these 25 FPS and I will export them as a 5 FPS video. So now let's hit export. And then here you can see that all of these images appear. And now we have all of these frames here, but this is still not every 8th frame. And what we do here is that we delete some of the PNGs that we have here. So I delete every second one. You have to do this manually, sadly. I don't really know a way around this right now, maybe someone else does, but this is how I do it with this. So we delete every second frame. Now we do have every 8th frame of this original video file. And this is basically what I'm doing with all of the videos first. So I can get all of these single frames. And then when we kind of go through them, you can already see, oh, it looks quite choppy, but it's still quite nice. And this right here, these PNG files, we're gonna put into Photoshop now. In Photoshop, I have this template prepared. It's just frames that fit the format, the video format that I have. So I will just select all of them and then just drag and drop. And then they just automatically clip. And then I will do the same thing with all of them. It's a little bit of a hideous work because you have to work with all these singular frames and it's a lot of repetition. But this is how you do it. You can also make a template where you have 9 frames on one page if you want to use less paper. You can also do 4 frames on one page or 2. This depends on the quality that you want for the final animation and how much you're willing to spend on paper or printer costs, and also just your personal preferences. But for me, 6 frames per page are ideal because you also need to think about how small things you are going to do for the animations are going to be. How small do you have to cut with your cutter knife? How small do you have to paint with your paintbrush or your markers or whatever kind of art mediums or tools you use? And now I can just go and print this in my printer. And now that I've printed out all my sheets, I can finally start working on the animations. For this one, it's just gonna be this red acrylic marker, and I'm gonna just paint the hand because it's my hand, but it is supposed to be the mysterious beings or figures' hands, so it needs to be really red. So let's do that. Now I painted all the frames that I needed, and the next thing to do would be to scan these frames. For this, I personally use my printer. If you have a real scanner, that would be much better because the quality will be much nicer. But I'm trying to work with what I have here, so I'm going to use the scanner that is integrated into my printer. I luckily have an app that is connected to my printer that I can use to scan it and then directly get the photos on my phone, which makes it much easier to transfer them to my laptop. And in this app, I have like settings that I can set for the format I want to scan in. I am scanning as a JPEG because in my case, I can only choose between JPEG format or PDF, but in this case, JPEG is a bit better. So this is what I'm going for, and I'm going for color mode, of course, and then that is A4 size because it's A4 paper. And now I'm going to do the other one. Make sure that if you put it on your printer that you put it on there as straight as possible, so later when you transfer it back to your computer and you have to work with the singular frames and cutting the singular frames, that you don't have to rotate all the time, because if you have a straight image right away, that makes it much easier. Now I have both pages scanned and they are both on my phone, and the app saves it to my phone, and then I can automatically just transfer them to my laptop, which I'm gonna do now. And now we're back on our computer, and you can see that I have my 2 sheets here, my 2 frame sheets. And now you can just like cut them out individually. What I do is just that I use my computer's or Windows editing program. And then what I'm going to do is that I just save these as a copy, and then I'll just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, 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 until I rename them because it's a little bit easier. When I'm done with one of the sheets, so I have all of these 6 frames as singular JPEGs. And then now that I have all of my 6 singular frames, I don't need the sheet anymore, but just for archiving purposes, I can just put it into this Sheets folder to just have it a bit more organized. What I'm going to do next is that I'm going to rename my files. And here I have also a handy trick that my supervisor actually introduced me to rename your files faster. It is a program called Bulk Rename Utility. You can just look it up and then download it to your computer. And it's really handy because I'm going to select all of these images, and then I can replace these old names with new names. And this is really cool. They have like a lot of different functions. And then I'm going to rename these, and then they're all automatically renamed inside of this folder. And then we're going back into Premiere Pro. So now that we're back in Premiere, we can see our footage again that is going to be mixed media very soon. And to do this, we are going to File, and then on Import. And then of course we are going to the location where our footage is located. And then make sure to check the very first image, so the one that is numbered with a 0 or a 1 or wherever you want to start. And really make sure that only the footage that you want to be included in this clip is in this folder, so nothing else. The subfolders, they don't matter because they are not really numbered and they are before these images, but everything after that will be included in this next image sequence that we're going to import into Premiere. And then also make sure to click Image Sequence here, make a check, and then we hit Open, and you can see that down here Premiere actually imported all of these images as a sequence or as a video clip. And I'm just going to change the label for my personal organization because everything in my project that is mixed media is labeled as pink. And then what we're going to do, we can look at it and we can see, this is way too fast, right? But we need longer footage because the original video is much longer and we wanted to mimic the look of the 8 FPS per second animation. So you right click your footage, you modify interpret footage, and then you make Premiere assume that the frame rate is 3 frames per second. And now you can already see that this is actually what we want, and now we can import it. And you can see that the clip is now a bit shorter than the original. And it is also black and white, which is not supposed to be. So let's remove this black and white here. And we are also going to click on R on your keyboard. And then we will just drag it a bit so it will actually line up with our footage, the original footage we have. And then of course, we're going to scale to frame size. And now we have the integrated mixed media footage in our Premiere project. And that is basically how I did all of the animations in this film. Now that you know my animation workflow, I would love to show you a closer look into some specific animations that I made. And what I'm also going to do is that I'm always going to show you the before and after comparisons so you can really see the difference between the two. I'm now starting with my first animation, And this is the very first animation in the whole film. So I'm kind of going like in a chronological order. And I just printed out like a simple 6x2 grid of frames that I made in Photoshop before. And this is going to be an overlay animation, so this is why I don't have any pictures on here. And today I'm working with old coffee grounds, and I just mixed them with water, and I'm going to paint with those coffee grounds to kind of have like an abstract chemical reaction on the paper. Okay, and this is the first picture. My first frame's done. It is quite wet, so I'm gonna just leave it out to dry. After the coffee sequence that I made dried, I also scanned it in, which was very, very messy, by the way. I have coffee grounds everywhere. But I also scanned that in and did the same thing that I did with the other frames, and then in the end nested it together as a sequence. So I have one single clip with all of my frames. And now this clip is inside of my timeline. And what I'm going to do here, because now you can see it's just the frames, but it's supposed to be an overlay for the clip underneath of the eye opening. So what I'm going to do is that I just go here into Effect Controls, and under Opacity you can find the blend mode. It is really simple, it depends on what you have, but just play around with all the modes that you have. There are a lot of different options. What could work, for example, is multiply. So here you can see that you have like a lot of the coffee grounds visible, and you can also see the edges of the water. But in this case, I was like, okay, I want something else as like color burn. It's really much more contrasted. You'd also try something that's really artsy, and you see some of them work more than others do. And then we also have something like this, which could be interesting to do in like other projects, because here the coffee grounds really look really chemical because they have like a blue color in it. There is this shot really in the beginning of the film where the character holds or cups the flower like this. And this shot I'm gonna craft out of 3 different layers. So I'm working a lot with layering in this film and collaging and everything. And the base layer is basically this. And I'm going to start cutting out in the middle and going bigger and bigger with every frame. And then below this, I'm going to layer a scan that I made of pink flower petals. These are actually magnolia petals. And I made this scan in here previously, and then I just put these below so we have like a petal growing effect. And then on top of all of this, I'm going to put the cherry blossom flower from the cherry tree. So now I have all of these cut out, and I'm going to lay these below, and I'm just going to secure those with some basic tape on the sides. And now as a final step, I'm going to cut out all of these flowers, and then I'm going to put them on here with a glue stick. And now I have all of the frames done. And you can see it really, really nicely how it's transitioning to the whole fill-out. And this is really nice because it's really layered. It has 3 different layers, which gives this clip a lot of depth. Now there is only one animation left that I still have to do, and that is the one where you would get the break the cycle ending, or where you decide to make the character fight against the illusion that they're having. And I want it to be really chaotic, really rough. I still have these that I printed extra at the beginning. So I think I might try something on here, and then I'm going to work with blending modes in Premiere Pro after. Or I'm maybe gonna do a black background and then do some like scratch effects with the cutter knife, which I think would be really cool and fun to do. I think I'm just gonna try both and then see what works best, to be honest. Okay, so for the first version I'm trying out, these are my chosen art supplies. I have a really old fine liner pen and also a really old Edding permanent marker and just a normal pencil. I don't really know how to start with this, but I think one thing about mixed media is that you just have to start doing it and then see how it turns out. So I think I'm just gonna like do this. I think this will work. One thing I do focus on when I make these animations is that I'm trying to stay on the edge and kind of only have a little bit inside. But mainly I'm trying to stay on the edge because in the middle we have the main action going on. I already like this quite a lot. I think that maybe, let's see. Maybe I'm not even going to use this pencil, to be honest. Maybe not. I really like how this is coming out, to be honest. And then I think if I add scratches to it with another layer, I have these printed out, my black frames, and then I'm going to use my cutter knife to like scratch the surface. And then I think maybe overlaying this with each other will work if I do the blending modes, and then we can get some really nice chaotic effects, I think. This is also something about mixed media that sometimes something else works out better than other times, and then you just switch to something else like here. Now I'm basically pretty much done. I really like that the two different versions of this, one of them is really like squiggly and fluid and it's a bit more rounder. And then we have the scratch technique, which is only sharp and it's really, really aggressive. So I hope that it will actually work if I put it into Premiere Pro. Okay, so now I have both of my clips in Premiere. Let's go to our timeline. And this is where we want to paste this over this fighting scene. And this is how it looks with just the echo effect applied and just in black and white. And now, let's see. We will scale this up and then we can see in blend mode what works here. Oh, divide is also kind of interesting, but I feel like for these, I think for this one I'm going with color burn because it has a more of like a darker look, because this one is on black, and I think to make it a bit clearer I will up the contrast, define the shadows a bit more and the blacks, so we really have more of the scratching texture in there. Well, you can do a lot with blending modes when it comes to mixed media when you want to add texture to your images. And I definitely recommend, if you start doing this, to just play around sometimes with this and see what works, see what doesn't. And sometimes you can just also find some really cool, interesting effects. I feel like I'm almost going for screen here. And in my case, I actually want to make the footage a little bit faster, making it a little bit more chaotic. Yes, 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 this is amazing. So now I'm just duplicating these. That looks nice. And that's basically how I got the textures onto this film passage. And it looks pretty cool. It looks very rough. And then of course we transition to the end after that. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth video about how I make my mixed media animations, and hopefully I was able to help some of you guys who want to get started with mixed media animations. If you guys have any questions after this, please let me know in the comments and I will try to answer all of them for you. Make sure to check out the rest of my channel and also my short film Bloom for what I made all of those animations, and I hope that I will see you in my next video, and until then, bye bye! Okay, this was an awkward goodbye wave.